Introduction. The day knowledge burned. There have been many days when cities burned, many days when empires collapsed, many days when armies conquered and kingdoms fell. But there were also days far more devastating, days when knowledge itself burned. Not just buildings, not just scrolls, but memory, discovery, progress. Across history, libraries have gone up in flames, sometimes in war, sometimes by decree, sometimes by calculated design. Each fire did more than destroy books. It erased centuries of human thought, scientific breakthroughs, cultural identity, and philosophical exploration. When the Library of Alexandria burned, it was not simply a building lost. It was the disappearance of the ancient world's greatest collection of human understanding. When Nalanda University was destroyed, generations of scholarship vanished in smoke. When Mayan codices were burned, entire civilizations lost their recorded voice. These were not isolated tragedies. They were turning points in human history. Every destroyed library created a void. Ideas disappeared. Innovation stalled. Civilizations were forced to rediscover knowledge that had already been mastered. The burning of knowledge reshaped the trajectory of humanity. It slowed progress. It altered cultures. It allowed new powers to rewrite history. Because knowledge has always been more than information. It is influence. It is identity. It is power. And throughout history, those who sought to control societies first sought to control what people could learn, remember, and imagine. This is the story of libraries that became too powerful to exist, of knowledge that rulers feared, of ideas that refused to die, and of the timeless battle between memory and authority. Libraries were centers of power. In the ancient world, libraries were not silent halls of leisure or passive shelves of forgotten scrolls. They were engines of power. To control a library was to control the mind of a civilization. The most famous example, the Library of Alexandria, was not built out of simple love for learning. It was a strategic weapon of the state. Its mission was radical and unapologetic, to collect all human knowledge from every land, every culture, every language. Ships that entered the Alexandrian harbor were not just inspected for goods, they were searched for books. Scrolls were seized, copied by the finest scholars of the age, and often the originals were kept while copies were returned, if anything was returned at all. This was not academic curiosity. This was information dominance. Knowledge governed everything that mattered. It governed trade and navigation, knowing the winds, the stars, the sea routes that determined who prospered and who perished. IT governed military engineering, siege tactics, weapon design, fortifications, and logistics. IT governed medicine and public health, understanding anatomy, disease, sanitation, and healing long before modern science. IT governed law, administration, and diplomacy, how societies were organized, taxed, ruled, and negotiated with rivals. To possess this knowledge was to possess leverage. Libraries shaped reality itself. They decided what was preserved and what was forgotten, what was taught and what was erased, what people believed about the world, and what they could never imagine. A library was not neutral. IT reflected power, ideology, and ambition. This is why libraries were guarded, funded, and feared. And this is why their destruction was never accidental. When a library was burned, it was not mere cultural vandalism. IT was political warfare. To destroy a library was to erase memory, to sever a people from their past, to cripple their future by denying them access to accumulated wisdom. Empires rose by building libraries. Empires fell by losing them. In the ancient world, control of knowledge meant control of destiny. And that truth has never changed. Only the form of the library has. Alexandria, a library too powerful to survive. The Library of Alexandria did not disappear in a single night of flames. There was no lone catastrophe, no single villain, no final dramatic ending. It was dismantled slowly, methodically, over centuries. Piece by piece. Fires damaged it. Imperial decrees weakened it. Religious purges hollowed it out. Political neglect finished what violence began. But beneath all these events was a constant truth. Every new authority saw Alexandria as a threat. The library did not merely store books, it preserved dangerous ideas. Ideas that questioned power rather than worshipped it. Alexandria preserved Greek philosophy, traditions that asked whether kings ruled by divine right or by human agreement, philosophers who argued that authority should be examined, not obeyed blindly. It preserved Egyptian science, systems of mathematics, medicine, and engineering that predated organized religion, knowledge rooted in observation and experimentation, not revelation. It preserved astronomical records, centuries of skywatching that suggested the universe followed consistent laws, movements of stars that obeyed patterns, cycles that did not require gods to intervene. These ideas were profoundly unsettling. To empires built on divine authority, they were subversive. To religious institutions built on exclusive truth, they were heretical. To political systems dependent on obedience, they were dangerous. Alexandria remembered what rulers wanted forgotten. It remembered civilizations older than empires, knowledge systems older than state religion, ways of understanding the world that did not depend on fear, prophecy, or unquestioned authority. And knowledge that cannot be controlled eventually becomes knowledge that must be destroyed. So Alexandria was not erased because it was obsolete, it was erased because it was too powerful. When the library faded, something profound was lost. Not just books, not just scrolls, but centuries of accumulated scientific reasoning. Mathematics that might have accelerated engineering, medical knowledge that could have saved generations, astronomical insights that hinted at laws of nature humanity would later rediscover 1,000 years later. Human progress slowed, not because knowledge was unreachable, but because it was deliberately eliminated. Civilizations did not forget how to think, they were forced to start again. Alexandria stands as a warning. The greatest threat to power has never been weapons or armies. It has always been memory. And the most dangerous institution in any age is the one that refuses to forget. When knowledge collides with religious authority. Throughout history, libraries did not fall by accident. They fell at a very specific crossroads, where belief merged with power. When religion remained spiritual, libraries survived. But when belief hardened into law and faith became a tool of governance, knowledge became dangerous. One of the clearest examples is Nalanda University in ancient India. Nalanda was not simply a school, it was a civilization of ideas. Its vast complexes housed millions of manuscripts, texts on mathematics that mapped infinity, astronomy that charted the heavens, medical treatises detailing surgery and anatomy, works of logic that trained the mind to reason, and philosophies that asked the most unsettling question of all: why? Scholars traveled thousands of miles from China, Korea, Tibet, Central Asia, and beyond, not to be told what to think, but to learn how to think. Inquiry was the currency of Nalanda, debate was encouraged, contradiction was welcomed, and no idea was sacred enough to escape examination. And that was precisely the problem. When invaders arrived, they did not see a university, they saw a threat. Nalanda was set ablaze, not for days, but for months. The fire burned so long because the knowledge stored there was immense. Entire libraries smoldered continuously, as if history itself was resisting erasure. This was not random destruction, it was deliberate. Rigid belief systems do not tolerate uncertainty. They demand certainty. They rely on obedience, not dialogue. Libraries, by their nature, undermine that certainty. They preserve competing explanations. They document alternative moral systems. They prove that truth has never belonged to one voice alone. A library invites doubt. Doubt invites comparison. Comparison weakens absolute authority. When faith becomes law, independent knowledge becomes rebellion. When doctrine replaces inquiry, questions become crimes. In such moments, books are no longer books. They are evidence. Burning them is not ignorance, it is enforcement. It is the silencing of possibility, the elimination of alternatives, the declaration that only one way of understanding the world is permitted. And history shows us, again and again, what happens next. When libraries burn, belief does not grow stronger. Only power does. Erasing memory to rule the future. Conquerors have always understood one unyielding truth. A people without memory are easier to dominate. Memory is power. It is the link between generations, the record of triumphs and failures, the foundation of identity, and in the ancient world, libraries were memory made tangible. They stored more than words. Indigenous histories, recounting who a people were and how they came to be. Cultural identity, preserving rituals, stories, languages, and art. Evidence of self-governance, showing that communities could rule themselves without foreign authority. Records of scientific achievement, demonstrating knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and engineering. Where these records survived, people could resist. Where they were destroyed, populations became vulnerable. When Rome conquered territories across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, local archives often vanished under the weight of conquest. Knowledge was rewritten, replaced by the narrative of the victor. Centuries later, colonial powers extended this strategy globally, in Africa. Indigenous histories were ignored or erased, in the Americas. Libraries and codices were destroyed to break cultural continuity. In Mesoamerica, the destruction was particularly devastating. Thousands of Mayan codices, meticulously crafted books recording mathematics, astronomy, and political systems, were burned. Only 4 survived. These texts proved what conquerors could not allow, that advanced civilizations existed long before European contact, that societies were sophisticated, self-organized, and fully capable of governing themselves. That truth was inconvenient. It undermined the justification for conquest. It threatened the narrative of superiority that empires relied on. So, it was erased. Erasing memory was never accidental. It was a deliberate tactic to strip identity, to suppress knowledge, to make resistance nearly impossible. To shape the future by controlling the past. The lesson is clear. Power is not merely about armies or borders. It is about who gets to remember and who is made to forget. Because history is not neutral, and memory, once lost, is almost impossible to reclaim. Forbidden knowledge and lost science. In the ancient world, knowledge was power. And some knowledge was too dangerous to survive. Libraries were not just repositories of scrolls. They were guardians of forbidden knowledge. They preserved ideas that challenged authority, questioned dogma, and expanded the boundaries of human understanding. They stored medical knowledge independent of priesthoods, teaching anatomy, disease treatment, and surgical techniques without relying on ritual or divine sanction. They safeguarded philosophical systems rooted in reason, rather than revelation, that asked uncomfortable questions about life, governance, and morality. They recorded mechanical concepts centuries ahead of their time, imagining machines, gears, and engineering principles that would not be reinvented for millennia. Some ancient texts suggest astonishing insights. Early understandings of steam power, long before the Industrial Revolution. Advanced surgical procedures that rival modern medicine. Nuanced studies of psychology, ethics, and human behavior, predating modern scientific thought. But when these libraries burned, humanity did not merely lose books. It lost entire generations of progress. Civilizations were forced to rediscover what had already been known, over and over again. Every scroll consumed by flame, every codex erased, was a setback measured not in years, but in centuries. Progress became a cycle of reinvention, rather than a continuum. Ideas that might have revolutionized societies, technologies, and medicine were repeatedly buried beneath ignorance, fear, or deliberate destruction. The loss was not accidental. It was political, religious, and strategic. Knowledge that empowered people to think independently, question authority, or innovate freely was systematically suppressed. And yet, even in destruction, these fragments of forbidden knowledge echo through time, reminding us that human ingenuity has always existed, often ahead of its era, waiting for rediscovery. The libraries that fell were more than cultural casualties. They were time machines burned alive, their ashes the lost bridges between past genius and present potential. Accident or policy? The pattern speaks. Fires happen, wars cause destruction, chaos sweeps through cities. But history is rarely random. Look closer, and a pattern emerges. Libraries, the very vessels of human memory, were consistently targeted whenever power shifted. During regime changes, old knowledge threatened new rulers. During religious revolutions, sacred doctrines clashed with secular or competing ideas. During imperial expansions, conquered people's histories were erased to legitimize domination. Rarely, if ever, were libraries preserved when their contents contradicted the new order. The destruction was not incidental. It was deliberate. It was policy. Burn the books, erase the records, control the story, shape the narrative to suit the ruler, the conqueror, the church, or the state. A burned library is more than a pile of ashes. It is a strategic tool, a weapon to silence dissent, to crush memory, to rewrite history in favor of the powerful. Every scroll, every codex, every tablet destroyed was a step toward uncontested authority, knowledge that might challenge power, inspire resistance, or reveal inconvenient truths was systematically eliminated. Control the knowledge, control the story, control the people. And once the story is controlled, rule becomes unchallenged. Across continents and centuries, the lesson repeats itself. The pattern is clear. Destruction of libraries was not misfortune, that it was calculated strategy. Because in the eyes of power, ideas are not harmless. Ideas are threats, and controlling them is the oldest and most effective form of conquest. The modern echo. Today, the flames are gone, but the strategy remains. Books are not always burned. Scrolls are rarely torched. Instead, knowledge is manipulated, hidden, or buried. Algorithms decide what you see and what you never see. Digital archives vanish silently, erased without notice. History is selectively taught, edited to favor certain narratives, omitted to suppress inconvenient truths. The method has evolved. The tools have changed. But the motive has not. Control knowledge, control perception, control power. Where ancient rulers relied on fire to silence dissent, modern systems rely on invisibility and omission. A missing archive today can be just as effective as a burned library in the past. A censored report, a filtered feed, or an erased website can shape belief, limit imagination, and enforce compliance without a single flame. Knowledge is still power, and the struggle over who controls it is far from over. The echoes of Alexandria, Nalanda, Timbuktu, and countless other lost libraries are not distant history. They resonate in the digital age, reminding us, where memory is controlled, freedom is fragile, and where information disappears, so too does the possibility of challenge. History teaches a hard truth. Fire may fade, but silence can be just as lethal. Conclusion: why this still matters. The destruction of ancient libraries was never a mystery. It was never a tragic accident of history. The reason was fear. Fear of educated populations who could question authority. Fear of competing truths that could undermine the official narrative. Fear of power being challenged by ideas that rulers could not control. Every time a library burned, humanity suffered a setback. Generations lost access to knowledge, insight, and innovation. Centuries of progress, medical, philosophical, scientific, and cultural, vanished in smoke. And today, that same instinct echoes. Every time information is hidden, censored, or rewritten, the same ancient fear is at work. It is a fear of people who think, a fear of ideas that challenge authority, a fear of the consequences of an informed society. One truth has never changed. Knowledge does not serve power. Knowledge challenges power. It questions it. It undermines it. And that is why libraries then and now are always under threat. From Alexandria to Nalanda, from Timbuktu to the digital archives of today, the pattern remains the same. Those who fear ideas seek to erase them. Those who seek control attack memory. But knowledge has a stubborn resilience. It survives in fragments, in whispers, in hidden corners. It waits for rediscovery, for curiosity, for courage. Because while fire can burn books, and algorithms can hide facts, ideas cannot be entirely destroyed, and as long as humans seek to learn, question, and remember, power will never have the final word.